Hello, and welcome to the presentation of the Glute Ham Developer Sit-Up. Today we will be discussing topics surrounding the motion of the GHD. These topics will include joints with their movements and surrounding muscles with their respective actions, the PVA, as well as the application of Newton's laws to the GHD. But first, I would like to show you an actual clip of the movement. Moving within the sagittal plane, and with a small rotation of the glenohumeral joint in the transverse plane, the individual begins their initial movement from the up position to the down position. The table below depicts the primary joints, their beginning position, the movement, along with the muscles and their respective actions involved. In this movement, the ankle and knee joint work as stabilizers, and not so much movement can be seen. Because the individual is working to control their movements against gravity, the muscles causing movement of the hip and spine are moving eccentrically. When going from the down to up position, the individual needs to overcome gravity, requiring the concentric action of the responding muscles. Not noted on the table, but also important to know, is that in the down to up phase, the knee extenders are activated concentrically to begin the movement. The glutes and other hip extenders must also be isometrically active to anteriorly tilt the inferior portion of the hip to allow the spine to keep a more neutral position throughout the movement.
Now, let's briefly discuss the position, velocity, and acceleration of GHD sit-ups. GHD sit-ups are performed as a closed-chain exercise using a glute ham developer apparatus. The exercise moves along the sagittal plane with relatively consistent movement patterns. While performing GHD sit-ups, the angular position of the individual transitions from flexion to hyperextension, although there are segmented variations of this exercise that do not place the spine in a hyperextended position. When performing the GHD sit-up, angular displacement occurs due to the change in lumbar spine angle. With angular displacement, angular velocity can also be found. Angular velocity is described as the rate of change in angle over time. Angular acceleration, however, is described as the change in angular velocity over change in time. Changes in angular acceleration can be observed when fatigue occurs after several repetitions of this exercise. As muscle fatigue increases, angular velocity and acceleration decrease, and the exercise becomes more difficult to perform. In most cases, the force of gravity will be the primary means of resistance for this exercise, affecting position, velocity, and acceleration of GHD sit-ups.
So how do Newton's laws factor into sit-ups performed on the glute and hamstring developing machine? Well, Newton's laws factor into just about all movement performed in the human body, but I will focus specifically on how the first and second laws factor into these sit-ups. Newton's first law states that an object will remain at rest or continue to move with constant velocity as long as the net forces on that object are equal to zero. In the starting position at rest, the center of gravity of the body is hanging off the posterior edge of the GHD apparatus. Therefore, the force of gravity at this point wants to force the trunk into extension. However, there is no motion in the starting position because the upward forces produced by the musculature of the participant are equal to that of the mass and the gravity, which wants to force the trunk towards the ground. This is typically achieved by an initial contraction of the hip flexors and or gripping the GHD apparatus as seen in the figure. Newton's second law states that the force of an object is equal to the mass of that object multiplied by the acceleration of the object. When beginning the down phase of the movement, as the hip flexors contract eccentrically from pictures A to C in the figure, the force created by the mass of the trunk and the acceleration of gravity overcomes the inertia of the participant, causing the trunk to extend and accelerate towards the ground. At the bottom of the movement, there is a brief moment when no motion occurs. Net force being applied to the body at this moment is zero, which would be seen in picture C. In order to complete the up phase of the movement, the hip flexors must create enough force to overcome the inertia created by the mass of the trunk and the acceleration of gravity to lift the trunk back into a seated upright position. For example, if a participant weighed 70 kilograms and their trunk made up about 55% of their total mass, which is about average, then they would have to overcome 377.3 newtons to complete this up phase. A common error when performing sit-ups on the GHD machine is to initiate the up phase of the movement with only the iliopsoas instead of also activating the quadriceps. The rectus femoris is a strong hip flexor passing over the acetabulofemoral joint, originating in the anterior and inferior iliac spine and inserting into the superior patella and tibial tuberosity. Increasing the knee extensor activation will, as you will see in this video, will increase the upwards force, increasing the acceleration of the movement. And it also reduces shear stress on the lumbar spine by tilting the pelvis, allowing for greater extension range at the spine.
Thank you for taking the time to view our GHD project. We hope you enjoy, and we look forward to seeing your comments.